Hey everybody, we want to thank you guys for participating with us again. This is just a new thing that we're trying to do where we just have a pastor's chat. It's not scripted. It's just us off the cuff, just talking about the message that you just heard or you watched last Sunday about fear and faith. And really, the reason we're doing this is we just get together and we chat quite often. We're a family, we're a team as pastors, and we just always have really good conversations, and we wanted you guys to be a part of it. And maybe you'll be able to take some nuggets out of the conversation we have to be able to apply to your life. So with us right now, we have Pastor Kenny, who's our Kit Carson campus pastor, helps us out here. Pastor Brett, who's my assistant pastor and our Shinewells campus pastor. And then we got Pastor Lori, who pastors everybody, and myself and them. She's in charge, really, but just kidding. But we're going to move forward with this. So guys, we've been on a topic for a couple of weeks, though, really about the 12 spies that Moses sent out to seek out the promised land, and 10 came back negative. 2 were ready to take the land. We've kind of talked about that. But last week we hit more on fear, seeing through fear, not faith. What did you guys take away during the Sunday's message about seeing through faith? How would that apply to you and to the people and to today? I mean, seeing through faith, not fear, the difference between the 2 and the 10, 2 spies versus the 10. What do you think, Brett?
Well, I think really what hit me this morning about the message was when you talked about we don't live in uncertain times. So I think the idea that we serve a God who wasn't taken by surprise by everything that's going on, who isn't taken by surprise by anything in our life that happens to us, but that we can be certain because we know God is in it, that he will carry us through it. And I think that's the same thing that keeps coming back to the 2 spies. You know, the 2 spies were sure that they could take the land, not because they saw something different. They saw the same thing. Yeah. They saw the same obstacles. They saw the same problems. And in the same way in our life, just because we're followers of Christ, it doesn't mean we're not going to have problems. We're not going to have issues. But the key is that when uncertain times come, we can be certain because our God is certain. And that's really what I took away from the message that I thought was really powerful, is that we can have a confidence that no matter what we see or what we come up against or what comes up against us, that we can be certain that God is with us and that he'll carry us through it.
That's true. You know, because it's interesting when we think about what do we mean, you know, you hear it on TV, you hear it on news about living in these uncertain times. It's almost like, what does that mean? Really, and basically, because the trials we're seeing today are not new. It goes all the way back to the creation, really, where rise and fall of governments like Israel and Rome, and not that our governments crash or nothing, but we've seen kingdoms built, kingdoms fall. We've seen viruses come and viruses stay, you know, H1N1 and all these kind of things. But yet, so it's not new what we're seeing, but it makes you wonder what the uncertainty is, except for a change in our routine. You know, we get routinely where we like to be in church on Sunday mornings in a building. We routinely like to go to work. Maybe that's what some people mean when they say uncertainties, because, I mean, what's the difference? I mean, God knows everything, right? He knew this was coming when he died on the cross, but yet we look at it as uncertainty because our normality is disrupted. But God's isn't, you know, so maybe seeing through his perspective of this isn't nothing big compared to what God sees every day, you know. I don't know.
Well, you brought up Mark 11:22. It says, have faith in God, and then it goes on in 23. It says, for surely I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be removed and cast into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that those things that he says will be done, and he will have whatever he says. And I think there, you know, it says the key is to do not doubt in his heart, you know, and everything that we say with uncertainty, I mean, that the root of it is doubt, you know, and even in the heart of doubt, you know, it's a wavering, it's a going back and forth and weighing between 2 options, you know. Isn't that what doubt really is, you know, is sitting there and going between the pros and the cons and looking between 2 things, And I think that's where a lot of us, when we have uncertain times, you're sitting there and you're looking between two things and you're wavering and you're going back and forth and back and forth. And that right now, I think this is where a lot of people are, is in between, in this in between time. And I think that's where, God is saying either you're in or you're out. It's like, do not doubt. This is not a season where we should doubt, but have faith. And that's where I think, it's like we need to stir up the inner man and say, okay, so we're not supposed to be people of doubt, but people of faith. Right. And I just love Joshua, because if you go on and you read the book of Joshua, you fall in love with this guy. Because after Moses dies and you read the exploits of Joshua and the battles that he fights and all of these different things that he does, you fall in love with the spirit that this guy carries. Because even in like the first 2 chapters, God tells him, it's like, be strong and courageous. Do not be dismayed. I love how God talks to him, because he just builds his inner man up. He's sitting there saying, don't be doubtful. It's like, get in or out, be strong, be courageous, go forward. And I love that. That's who God wants his people to be. And so the idea of these uncertain times, it's like, again, it's like that language plants the idea that this should be uncertain. So even in this scripture, it's like we shouldn't be doubting. So I love that this in Mark, it says, but believes those things shall be done. He will have whatever he says. So again, it goes back to, it's like whatever we're confessing, that should be so important right now. It's like being careful what we're saying in this time. Because we should be so certain of what we are saying and what we are professing that we're speaking in faith.
That's true. Yeah, I think it's key, because definitely what goes in our heads goes into our hearts. Absolutely. When we accept it. So seeing social media or seeing these potential facts, which is also changing, see different numbers of deaths are changing and different this and different that, but it seems like people are on either side of the fence. Those who are like, we're just moving forward, reopening in the world and going at it, and then you got those who are scared and saying, well, it's not wise, we need to stay in our house for a year and bunker down and and hide, so what could be some things that to tell the people at home, even, or even for us here, because as pastors we got to face these decisions too. How can we see through faith? What are some things that we could do right now to help us see through faith in this season?
Well, I know, Hebrews, and I think we talked about this last week, Hebrews 11, faith is a substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And what did you talk about this morning? That in the Word there's 7,000 promises. Sure. 7,000 promises that God stands behind. And, a promise is only as good as the one who makes it. But God has given us those promises. And just like Lori was saying, when she's talking about where Jesus said, speak to the mountain and command it to be cast in the sea and do not doubt. Well, how do you come to that place where you eliminate doubt and activate the measure of faith that Christ has placed in you? It's through the Word. You have to continually meditate on the Word. So it's not just saying, I know the Word, but it has to get into your soul. It has to get into your mind. It has to change the way you think until you've meditated on it. You've rolled it over in your mind enough that now you're like, yeah, I've got this. I've got my anchor on this word, and now it removes doubt and lets my faith work. And I think that's key. And if you're continually filling yourself, because on a daily basis, we all have to make a decision. We have to decide, who do we believe, right? I mean, that's the question we all have to do. Who do we believe today? Do I believe what I see? Do I believe what I see the world saying? Or do I believe what's in the Word? And I think that's the decision we all have to make on a daily basis. And if we're not rolling that Word over in our heart, and we're not standing on the promises of God in our life, then we'll be just like Jesus said, we'll be like the house built on the sand.
There's a scripture that says, who shall believe the report of the Lord? You know, and there are some people that, you know, dismiss that. You know, it's like, well, that's no longer relevant for today. You know, it's like that was, you know, that's historical. That was, you know, relevant back then. But I think that needs to be a question that we ask ourselves, is like, who shall believe the report of the Lord today?
Yeah.
You know, and do I believe the report of the Lord?
Well, that statement you made there, right, about we're not living in uncertain terms or uncertain times. I wrote 3 notes down while you were preaching. It wasn't that you didn't have any more good points. That's just all I got written down. But
You wrote your own points down.
That was the first
were
one
busy too.
I wrote down. Actually, I wrote them down, and it's interesting because I think all 3 of us have now commented on it. But I think it was definitely a God-inspired statement that you put out there. But maybe it was like your red letters for the Sunday or something like that. But anyway, you know, I think that's such a powerful statement, though, in itself. The fact that, you know, we're not living in uncertain times, but I think they seem uncertain to us because I think we're looking through it through the lenses of how we perceive the world. Because I think as humans, we naturally we look at what does it take to change our circumstances, and by nature, ourselves. I mean, by nature we always refer back to ourselves. What does it take for us to change? And that's where the problem becomes, because then when you look at it through the scope of the whole world, we can't affect anything, let alone half the time we can't even affect our immediate circumstances that much independently, just by ourselves. And I think, you know, kind of looking back to the 12 spies, it's the exact same thing when they, you know, we've been talking about them, when the 10 had the same information, they saw the same thing, they saw a completely different story.
Yeah.
The 2 that came out, they had their faith. They looked through the perception of God's vision of the world, which, you know, I think if we do the same thing today, whether it's in our business, whether it's in our finances, you know, I mean, right now, a lot of people are out of work. So, a lot of fear and concern in finances. And that's so natural to experience that fear. If we don't experience some amount of fear, there's probably something wrong with us as humans.
Sure.
You know,
yeah.
because I don't care how mature you are as a Christian, you're still human. But I think it's what you do with that fear. What do you choose to channel that fear through? Because if you choose to just turn inward, then everything looks so out of focus. There's no hope in ourselves. But when you focus that through Christ's promises, the 7,000 promises, that's where we find the hope, you know, in our every part of our life.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, you said a good thing there when you said we're uncertain, you know, because I think sometimes we build our lives around, you know, especially in America. You've been overseas a lot. I've been overseas quite a bit. And you go to other countries, they don't have the American dream concept that we do.
Yeah.
We actually, in some ways, seem like a selfish nation when we want by what we want. You know, we want, you know, the picket fence, the beautiful house, 6 figures a year or more, you know, and then when that gets shaken, it brings uncertainty. Right now there's a lot of people in the world that their 401ks are affected, their retirement plans, their insurance benefits, and all these stuffs are being affected right now, and it probably is creating uncertainty, no doubt. That's why stimulus packages came out or whatever to try to boost morale. But it seems like if we can get our faith back to what I think maybe God designed us, because when he created Adam and Eve, he created them first for a relationship with him.
Sure.
Nothing else. You know, he didn't say build a nice house and you know, all this stuff. He wanted them to be blessed, but he didn't create them for, the American dream.
Yeah.
He created them for a relationship with him.
Yeah.
And then when that fell, he had to work the land now for bread. But even in the future, when you fast forward, when he teaches the disciples to pray, he said, pray for your daily bread. Not monthly, not yearly, not, he says daily. So I wonder if we could gear our faith back to the way God designed us to be with him, relationship with him. And I believe that's the only way we're going to make it through this is if people will pray, because I don't think we can trust social media. We can't trust news. We can't, I don't mean that bad to be negative, but there's just not a lot of, those two didn't trust the 10 negatives.
No.
They trusted what they knew with God. It seems like if we can shift that faith back to have a relationship with him, but also realize he said he'll take care of our daily needs. Sometimes God's promises that he said are yes and amen. They don't come in our timeline. Sometimes they come
Exactly.
in his timeline, which sometimes is at the very last moment to just make your heart beat, a little bit. You know what I mean? But I wonder if that would help some people's uncertainty to realize it may not end the way I think, but it's going to end the way God knows.
Sure.
That he knows how it's going to end.
Well, I think the thing that God keeps bringing back up to me, I know we've been talking about Joshua a lot, but one of the things,
He was the only good spy. It was him and Caleb.
He and Caleb.
The other two, we don't know who they are.
But
Negative Nancy's. Sorry.
there's two different kinds of fear. There's the negative fear, and then there's a reverence.
Absolutely.
Ooh, that's good.
And the one thing that I don't think
Reverence.
we've touched on a whole lot is the reverence and the fear of the Lord that we kind of get away from, and I think too that we as believers, and sometimes we as Americans, we take for granted that some of the freedoms and the rights that we have to worship in a free nation, and that reverence that we don't always give the Lord.
Mm-hmm. That's
You
true.
know?
Right.
And so that is something that, as we look further on into the stories of Joshua, that the Lord was bringing up to me the story of Rahab. And when Joshua, after Moses died, Joshua and went in as a spy into Jericho, because that was his next mandate from the Lord. In like the first two chapters of Joshua, was to go in and to spy out Jericho. And when they got in there, they kind of got trapped into the city, and people were pursuing them. And the Lord told him to go into Rahab's house. And this was something that, as I was reading the story, because we talk about fear and reverence, this is one of the definitions of fear: the reverence, the fear of the Lord. And then there is fear, and we know what this is, that scared feeling. But Scott had mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, how the enemy was actually terrified of the armies of Israel.
The giants in the promised land. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And that was in the land of Canaan. Well, Jericho is actually one of the cities in the land of Canaan, if you look it up in the Bible. But this is something that...
Make sure to read it slow enough for people to hear in the camera.
Okay. But that Rahab actually is talking to Joshua, that she actually says this to the men. She says, "I know that the Lord has given you the land, and the terror of you has fallen on us, and all the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the kings of the Amorites who were on the other side of Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. And as soon as we heard these things, our heart melted, and neither did there remain any more courage in anyone because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and earth beneath." So the people, their enemies, had a reverence and a fear of the Lord.
Sure.
But the people, the actual children of God, had lost their own reverence for the Lord. So the 10 spies, you know, that had come out of spying out the land. Now this is a little bit further down the road, but they didn't get this. But this is what the enemy was saying about the God of Israel. Our heart had lost its own courage because
Yeah.
we knew that your God
It was bigger.
was bigger.
Wow.
You know, and I think that's where, you know, it's like the children of God were saying that we're like grasshoppers, but the enemy was saying our hearts had utterly melted within us because we knew who your God was. You know, so there were two different fears at play in this. One had a reverence and a fear of the Lord, and the other one had a fear that had gripped their heart because they didn't know and see God and have a reverence and fear of the Lord.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's key. You know, because if you look at our world today, I mean, I've been over to Europe a number of times. Remember one specific time I preached at a church, and then I went to the host's house afterwards, and the host grew up under communism. He said, I was there when the wall came down, and they got a big statue of Reagan in their area, you know, because Reagan helped the wall come down. And but he said things like, you know, which is crazy to think anybody would think this is okay in America. But he said that they'd get a truck every month that'd come to the community and ration food out to the families. And they only could get what they got. He said there's 5 kids in his family, and they each got 1 candy bar for 30 days to split amongst all 5. They would come through once a year and deliver shoes for the year. And if you had a pair that fit you, great, you got shoes for the year. If not, you didn't. That was just under the communist mindset, which makes it strange to me that anybody would think, okay, it'd be good to stay in line in America and wait for food to possibly get a ration, you know, when we're supposed to be the American freedom, you know, by the sweat of your brow kind of deal. But anyways, I was chatting with him, and he said when the wall came down, but what I want to say this is he did say, Scott, it's interesting, and this was a few years ago, and he said the same way Europe became a communist country, America's taking the same steps. And if they don't be careful, America is going to turn into that without even knowing it. And I'm not trying to point fingers or anything, but I think it goes along with what Lori's saying too, is because think about the church today. And take the church 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. We wouldn't tolerate things that are going on in the world the way we are today. Because it's kind of like the frog you put in water, turn temperature up slowly, the frog won't jump out. But if you put in boiling water, it's going to hop right out. And I think over time, because the only thing that Lori's saying here is that the guy said the same thing. He said, before Hitler's reign, he said there was enough believers in the church to rise up against and stop it from happening, but the Christians did nothing. And I think it's the same way here, because not in a bad way, but over time it's negative, because I think the church, the only way that could happen is the church itself in Europe didn't have the healthy fear and reverence of God to do something. They were apathetic.
Yeah.
You know, they're just like, you know. And I mean, in some ways I kind of say happened today is because over time we're accepting some things that we probably wouldn't have accepted in the past, and probably the biggest time to pray. You know, because how powerful was the church, and it is getting political here in this statement, but how powerful was the church when Trump won? There was enough Christians praying, first off, and voting. You know, I believe that's what tipped the scale a little bit in his favor, because we knew in our hearts that was the kind of leader this country needed for this season. And I think right now too, with the whole shutdown and all this, it's tragic, because in some ways I see the enemy's divided the church, and he thinks. In my mind, I see, man, you just took the walls off the church, and we're going to kick butt because we don't have the borders that we had before. And I think we can rise to the occasion. But my prayer is that we don't lose that healthy reverence, fear of God as a church. To say, you know what, we can't take this wickedness. We can't take this. We have to stand up and do something. Does that make sense? I mean, or is that just too much
Yeah.
rambling? I don't know, but
No, it's good. No.
Well, I think we have to say, okay, what kind of fear are we going to have at this moment?
Yeah.
A fear of the Lord, or do we have seeds of fear that are keeping us from moving forward?
Sure.
You know, and which fear is motivating at this moment? You know, because a fear of the Lord will motivate us to do the things that the Lord is telling us to do. You know, and in moments like this, you know, I mean, look at what the Lord is telling them to do. They're moving forward. You know, there's an advancement that happens when we fear the Lord. It is never something that keeps you settled and sitting down. Because when Scott's talking about faith, you know, faith without works is dead, right? So just to have faith is not something that keeps you in your recliner.
Yeah.
You know, great men and women of faith are great men and women of action. You know, those are the people that have advanced in their life, because it is faith that pleases God, because he's telling us to do something and we go out and we do it.
Yeah.
You know, that is, I mean, in itself, faith kind of has a synergistic action movement that goes with it. You know, it's not just a belief system. There is a motivating power that goes with faith. You know,
Sure.
the spies that went into the promised land, you know, it's like they may have believed that that was the promised land, but they didn't have the action that went with going out and possessing. You know,
Sure.
but look at Caleb and Joshua. They also knew that that was the promised land. They believed with faith that that is our land, and that if God said to go get it, then it is ours and we can get it.
Yeah.
And so they were willing to work to go and conquer the land.
Yeah.
So faith and works go together. So I believe that there's also an action that goes with faith.
Well, it should be, yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of meat we're talking about there, you know.
Yep. Definitely.
But to see through faith, I think what Lori's saying too is there's action to be taken. It's a verb, not just a sight. It doesn't take much action to be afraid,
No.
but it takes action to see through faith. But real quick, we're closing up on time, so maybe just real quick, a round table, 1 minute closing comments that people can take from this.
One thing that's really come to my mind is something I've used often overseas to just talk about who God is. And the analogy I use, because often I would teach outside, is I say, if you held your thumb up and you put it up to the sun, when you look, it looks like your thumb blocks the sun. But in your heart and your mind, you know that the sun is bigger.
Sure.
And I think oftentimes when we let things of the world get too close to us, we forget, even though we maybe know in the back of our mind how big God is and how able he is, it takes our focus off of him and onto our problem. So even though our problem is smaller than God, our faith is deactivated, because in our mind, just like in the 10 spies, in their mind, the problem was bigger. And so I would just encourage people to really get into the Word and really meditate on God's bigness and on who he is and what he's able to do, and maybe shrink back a little from the things that cause you to feel fear and doubt and cause you to struggle to believe that God can do something.
Sure. It's good. Yeah, definitely. It's awesome.
Well, and I don't think I have anything really super deep, but I guess it's more practical.
Good, practical.
You know, for me anyway, you know, with running a business and you know, all the stuff we do, the church and everything else, sometimes both the time, but more the, you know, with everything going on right now, the economy and everything else, sometimes, you know, all the little details begin to just kind of they get at you. I mean, one of them's maybe not too much, but then you get 2 or 3 and 10 and 20 and 100. You know, every little problem keeps piling up, and it's so easy to begin to focus on those throughout the week. And you know, I think for me anyway, what I've found is when that starts happening, if first of all, just pray. You know, I mean, sometimes that's maybe the most simple thing that we try to complicate it. Pray, and then just, you know, take God's promise over each individual problem that comes into your life and attack each one through God individually, instead of allowing the whole big problem to become, or every little instance to become a whole big problem that just overrules your life. You know, every big problem is usually a cluster of 20 or 30 small little things that just begin to well up, get bigger and bigger. And I think if we can attack each little thing as it comes along in the name of Jesus and put our faith in him for each little thing, then the whole big group doesn't seem near as bad at the end of the day.
That's right. That's good. That's a good point. And
very practical.
you say prayer is the most simple, but when you got 20 or 30 problems, it seems like the most hard thing to do. It seems difficult to just get away and pray. Lori, 1 minute. Close up for everybody.
I think, you know, remembering that your enemy knows who your God is, you know, and your enemy's heart has melted at what your God has done. Your enemy has a reverence for who your God is. And we need to get that same fear and reverence for the Lord that our enemy has.
Yeah.
Let's work on that in our own lives and put that fear that we have of our problems and what is going on in the world, let's put that where it belongs, at the feet of Christ, and not let it rise up and take a place in our lives and in our minds and in our hearts that it shouldn't have. The Lord says this is him talking to Joshua before he goes in to Jericho. And he says, "Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid, nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." So there is no place that we are going that God is not with us. And he's saying, be strong and courageous. And with that courage, and we should have this encouragement that God is going with us. And that fear and that reverence that the enemy has for him, let's have that for our own God.
Sure.
Yeah. Those are good, good comments. So main thing I'll say as we wrap up here is that, like everybody had good closing comments. So main thing is just build up your faith muscle by getting in the Word, getting into the praise and worship, so you can see through God's eyes, not our own. And I think that would be a great thing to take. So God bless you guys. Thanks for participating. And please comment, connect with us. Let us know what you're thinking and how you feel. I got some text messages. That was great. So just let us know that you're connected, watching, and how we can help you. So God bless you, and we'll talk next time.
Have a good week.
God bless you.